Hello and welcome to a very hastily organised live stream. This is a Q&A with regard to the Ukraine war. I am Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is ATP Geopolitics, as many of you will know who are here because you're here. But I'm really excited to welcome a guest. We've been trying to hook up again for the last week or so. Professor Gerdes of his own channel. Do you want to introduce yourself, Darren, and let people know who you are and where they can find you? And I'll link it all probably a little bit after this in the description.
Sure. If you're looking to find me, you can just
Oh, you're crackling up a little bit again.
I'm crackling up again. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me click something here and turn that off and see if that works. Is that better?
Keep talking.
Okay. So if you want to find me,
that's better.
I'm on YouTube. Just look for my last name, Gerdes, and Ukraine, and you'll find me very easily. You'll see me in a picture with an American flag and a Ukrainian flag together, and it's Professor Gerdes Explains is the name of the YouTube channel. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and I'll just bring that up in a second. I haven't got anything particularly pre-prepared to talk about, but there is a lot to talk about. Obviously, as always, when you're in a war, the geopolitical landscape, and all the things taking place in the war. Thank you very much to Aussie T for becoming a member, by the way. Really appreciate that. Such great support, you guys. What do you think has been the most significant stuff that's taken place in the last week? And I have a feeling Prigozhin might feature at least somewhere.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what happened with Prigozhin. I did a video a couple days ago where I had a Rubik's Cube, and I tried to explain, like, every time I try to look at it from a different angle, it still doesn't add up. I don't know how much you have figured out about Prigozhin and what he did and why he did it and why he's not dead. And I can't figure it out. I mean, I'm looking for it. So yeah, this was just a few days ago. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was just before the weekly recap, I think it was, just before that. So at any rate, that's the channel, and if you're looking for it, yeah. So it's like a puzzle piece that just doesn't fit into the jigsaw. I mean, that's really what Prigozhin feels like. I don't think he was trying to overthrow Putin. I don't know what you were thinking.
Yeah, I mean, you're still crackling a little bit. I think, yeah, like you, I think it's really, it's a bit of a mystery. It is a puzzle. I think what I think now is that initially he was seeking to overthrow Shoigu and Gerasimov. He went to Rostov-on-Don, and apparently Gerasimov was there. But the latest that I heard, and this comes from Ukraine, the latest podcast for the Daily Telegraph, they were saying that actually the Russians got a bit of a heads up, and they did. You know, the Americans knew that something was going to happen even sooner. The Russians were really late to the game, but they got Gerasimov out of Rostov-on-Don, and therefore, well, from what I hear, he had to rush the mutiny attempt because he found out that the Russians found out, the FSB found out, and so therefore rushed to try and get Gerasimov, but they got him out of there sooner. So then went up to Moscow. There wasn't much resistance to him, but then got so far and realized that probably couldn't go all the way because they had, you know, they were ahead of him a little bit, and he didn't have it. He had what, maybe 8,000 troops to try and take Moscow. That's never going to happen. So I think a deal was cut.
Right.
Sorry.
And what was he going to do if he got to Moscow? Right. Like, what's the game plan? So my take, and again, this is just trying to piece it together, trying to make sense of it. Is what you're just saying is trying to take over the Russian military, which is not unreasonable as an authoritarian who worked for an authoritarian, and authoritarians tend to like each other until they can't trust each other. And so, when I say authoritarian, I mean Prigozhin and Putin. And Prigozhin had been singing Putin's song for a long time. He'd been very much mouthing. So Putin is an authoritarian who places subordinates off of each other in order to keep control. Like, he does that. And Prigozhin was very useful at slapping at the military hero, slapping at the oligarchs there on Putin's behalf, where Putin can be above that, right? So going to try to take over part of the military, and remember, he's trying to take over this segment of the military so he can run it so he can prosecute the war more effectively. Like, he wasn't a good guy trying to overthrow Putin and give them democracy and freedom. That wasn't his game, right? And when you see the civilians in the streets praising him, and you hear what they're saying, "Yeah, go give it to those Ukrainians." Like, that's what was actually going on. So I don't know, but a lot of it. I'm sorry, is it still crackling? On my end, I don't know why.
Yeah, that's just stopped actually. Just as you said that, it stopped. Yeah, I think the reaction has been really fascinating. So the reaction in Rostov and Don, everyone's being really kind of pro Wagner, as if, and I think that was their permission to be anti-government and to show uh, some kind of sentiment, some kind of negative sentiment towards maybe the government, the whole war thing. And they could do that through Wagner while still being nationalistic, right? And still being kind of pro-Russia. And it's really interesting. I've got this to show you that this might, I'd be really interested in what your reaction to this would be. So I'm going to show you just something that I think is quite interesting, because you have hope in the young, in you have hope in young people, right? And here we have a graduation in Moscow at Gorky Park, and you have a bunch of kids showing a Wagner flag, and then a load of kids running to get, to be a part of that, right? Which is to say that these kids are kind of pro Wagner. You see them here; they're all getting behind it. But they're shouting. I think they're shouting, "I am Russia." And then you see these other Wagner flags around as well, sort of going off into the distance. Yeah, there. So those Wagner flags there. So what we have there is, oops, I've just got rid of that. So a few technical issues here. Yeah. So what you have there is this bizarre situation where the Russian youth are, on the one hand, shouting "I'm Russian," and on the other hand, showing support for Wagner,
Sure, it
which
makes
is kind
total
of
sense.
weird.
No, it makes
Sorry.
total sense. Wagner, however it's pronounced, has been the only gains that's been made over the last 6 months. And why wouldn't that? They'd be proud of that if they're getting a steady stream, a steady diet of information from Russian propaganda channels saying, "See how they're taking it to the enemy," and which is what they were seeing for the last 6 months, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Now, what's interesting is what happens. Like, so I was really not happy about the way that we UA-tubers, when this first broke, I was like, "Whoa, what's going on?" But we were a little bit too jubilant too quickly, like, "Oh, it's going to be a civil war." No, slow down, but it did break for Ukraine in a big way. Wagner's now off the battlefield, right? So that's a big plus. The FSB is trying to figure out which generals to remove. So that's a big plus. There was disarray. That's a big plus. So it's been good, but it's not been like an overthrow of the Putin regime or anything that people were hoping for. And we were a little bit too quick because we wanted it, right? So we were a little too quick to say that it's more than it was. And that was kind of unfortunate to my mind. But it did have some positive effects for Ukraine. I just don't know exactly where we go next.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So a lot of people jumping on this as being, yeah, great. But at the end of the day, Prigozhin is a psychotic. Well, he's both like a dangerous, like super dangerous individual and morally abhorrent. But on the other hand, he's also a bit of a realist. So he was the guy who was criticizing the Russian MOD in all the right ways. So he's saying all the right things about the Russian MOD, but whilst also it's a bit like Igor Gherkin, right?
Right.
Who's another ultra nationalist who's a terrible human being, but he's also criticizing the MOD incredibly astutely and correctly. So I see these guys as kind of realists, but they're not people you want to get into bed with. So it's yeah, I want to absolutely support what you're saying, but I'm not supporting you as a human being and you as kind of taking over leadership of Russia.
Right. And so
I
the
don't know if
question
it's
is,
worth you like, I don't know, unplugging, maybe jumping out the whole session and jumping back in. I can just go for it. So I'll let him do that. There's a bit of a crackly audio there, But this is something that I've been thinking a lot about. Prigozhin, he's taking up a lot of bandwidth with regard to the whole war. Obviously, the last few weeks, a mutiny is a really big thing. Was it a coup? Was it a mutiny? I think it's a mutiny that became a coup as soon as Putin came up and said, all those things in his speech that were damning of Prigozhin and the attempt there. So it turned from being a mutiny to an accidental coup, and then becoming this accidental coup. There was a realization that I can never succeed here. I can't take Moscow with the troops I've got. There isn't enough support in Moscow. And given that there isn't enough support in Moscow, I'm going to have to cut a deal. And then there were these rumors that the FSB had connections with, or I don't know, were threatening families of the top Wagner officers and things like that. So
yeah,
I think that there was no. Your audio is way better. There was no choice for Prigozhin to do anything but that.
So what was interesting was I was just watching.
Oh my God, you sound divine, if I could say.
Oh, well, thank you. I was watching something else where they were showing Putin in the crowd, or Putin's body double, or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. I don't get into that debate. Was it the body doubles, or it doesn't matter. He's trying to do what he needs to do to show support. But it was like almost like a toddler trying, like, well, I want to have a party too and have everybody love me, because the way that they treated Prigozhin out there, it's a weird thing to see Putin and or his Putin lookalike, whatever it was, out there in the crowd, when we know how Putin reacted for a long time. But even if it was actually Putin, let's say it was, right, he's got to shore up some support, because this was a pretty bad black eye. The upside of this, I try to look for the bright spots. The upside is Xi is in China looking at this going, maybe this wasn't that good of an idea, right? I mean, he's got to be thinking that. Putin's thinking, well, I didn't know this could go this sideways this quickly. And so it was good in a number of ways. Now, I wonder, if you are Prigozhin, where do you go? Do you continue to hang out in Belarus, or do you go to Africa and live with some warlord somewhere with your most faithful men, or what do you do?
That's a really great question. I think it really depends on what's actually happening with the Prigozhin. So there are all these claims that, and you noticed this as well. You talked about this on your live chat the other day, that we both noticed that Monday and Tuesday there was suddenly no trolls, right? And it's like, okay. And I put two and two together, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that St. Petersburg troll factory has been closed down. Lo and behold, that's exactly what had happened. So we saw like trolls disappearing, his troll factory is shut down, and actually it looks like his entire business empire is getting reined in by the Russian state. Now, that will define what Prigozhin does, because at the end of the day, he's a businessman. He's a mercenary warlord, which is first and foremost a businessman who goes around the world getting his fingers in a lot of natural resources pies. Can he continue to do that with what the Kremlin is doing at the moment? I don't know. I don't know enough about the ins and outs, but I guess his position is really quite precarious now. And what a difference a couple of weeks makes, right? Because he was all that in a bag of chips, and now he has been taken down a number of pegs. And I don't know what he does, and whether he will feature at all in the rest of the war.
So no, I don't think he will, at least not at this point, unless something changes. But what's interesting to my mind when we're watching that, I saw a couple of different articles. One that's talked about, well, one was President Putin's address, where he was talking about they've made, I don't know, 60 or 80 billion dollars or something, and I hope they haven't stolen much. Like, he actually said that in his address. I about fell out of my chair reading that. And then he said that that Wagner was funded by the Russian government, which gives the Hague an easy way to say, well, you said this, so there are some war crimes that are now on your head because it was funded. But Wagner, the way that Wagner did this was that they were a conduit to sell Russian weapons as well. Now, there's not a lot of Russian weapons to sell. So think about that. They were a conduit to selling Russian weapons in the Middle East and in Africa and other places, wherever they went, while they were being the mercenary group. So it was kind of like they were Amway salesmen, like while they were doing what they were doing. So that was kind of, but that's dried up because they need the weapons that they have. So it's an interesting thing. So can he go somewhere? Yeah, there's probably some African warlord somewhere that would like to have him and his mercenaries, but it'll be a lot smaller. Like you said, a couple of pegs, many rungs down the ladder from where he was before. And if I were him, I'd get out of Belarus. Like that just does not seem like it's a safe place. Even if you're surrounded by your faithful soldiers, that just, I don't know.
I don't know if there's a rumor, whether it's a tongue-in-cheek statement or whether this is actually true, but the rumor I heard that he's in a particular hotel in Belarus, in Minsk, I would have thought, that doesn't have openable windows, literally. But I don't know. I can't verify that, but that was one claim that I've seen. So
well, that would be good planning to So I mean, I don't understand. So here's the thing. So I know a lot about authoritarian leadership, right? I mean, leadership is my degree. I created multiple programs, a master's, a bachelor's, a minor. And so I know a lot about authoritarian leaders, and I can't understand how Putin can forgive this, right? I mean, now he didn't attack Putin necessarily. He was going after his underlings, but Putin then called it out as treason and made it look like he was coming after him, which I think was bizarre.
That's when it became that accidental coup.
Yeah, like he should have said, you can't go after my subordinates. That's not okay, right? Because that would have put Putin in a stronger position, but he didn't frame it that way. But then he was like giving amnesty. Now, if you get amnesty, doesn't that encourage the next wave of anybody who might have been thinking about this to maybe try it again? Because I don't know. It seems like a very weak thing to do if you're an authoritarian dictator to do that. Authoritarian dictators have to use force and fear in order to maintain their control. In the same way that a democratic leader has to have popularity and have to have the majority vote. And it's just part and parcel of where it is. But it just doesn't, it's like the Rubik's Cube. It just doesn't make sense. I can't add it. I can't fully be comfortable with any way I look at it. I don't know if you've had that same kind of experience, but that's where I am.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts have always been with Prigozhin that he is there and doing what he does, or was continuing to do what he did, because he had utility to Putin,
right.
And therefore, so what he was doing in Ukraine was therefore useful in some way. Like, he was successful on the battlefield to some degree, but also everything he was doing abroad was useful to Putin, and there was money coming in, and there was power, soft and hard power, being distributed around the globe, and that was being done in the name of Russia without being in the name of Russia. But what's really interesting is now that Putin has come out and said, "Hey, the Kremlin funded Wagner for a year to the tune of whatever the amount of money," as you said earlier, which implicates him for war crimes. Because and B, means that they literally are state sponsors of terrorism, because Wagner have been declared a terrorist organization by many countries. So therefore, Russia are literally state sponsors of terrorism, and so that's exactly really problematic. But even more problematic is perhaps for Russia is that if Wagner ceases to exist globally. And I don't know whether they've managed to compartmentalize what's going on in Ukraine with what's going on elsewhere. All of the kind of scare quotes good work that Wagner are doing for Russia abroad will not continue to take place, and so it's a real big mess, I think, for Putin as much as it is obviously for Prigozhin.
All right, so let's talk about Putin then. So you've just had this funding stream dry up. Your oil and gas has been, muted some. You've just been attacked in this way. Like, it's been a bad ride for Putin. Like, think about if you were Putin, how terrible you would feel. Like, I don't feel bad for the guy, but how terrible you'd feel when you're a 3-day or a 3-week special military operation. Next Saturday will be day 500. Like, wrap that around your, like, like, you never thought this was going to be, but you got bad advice and you listen to people who are lying to you, because in authoritarian regime, you can't tell the boss the truth. And so you were relying on this bad information that they fed up because they wanted to, like, so I don't know about you, but I used to think I would love to be a dictator. Like, I would love everybody to just do whatever I want. But the older I get, the more I recognize that that's the worst possible place that you can be. Like, we need each other. Like, you and I on other issues won't see eye to eye, but we'll keep each other honest. Right. By the way, I was giving you praise the other day on.
I heard it. Thank you, man. I did see
on
something
my live stream, just saying like we don't agree, but we actually do agree on the fundamentals. Like you want to show me how I'm wrong, and I want to show you how you're wrong, and we're okay with that. We don't want to shut each other down or stop the conversation or do what they're doing in Russia. We all have to have one opinion. Right.
Yeah.
So we're actually more on the same page than not, even though we see things differently. So, but if you're an authoritarian dictator who can tell everybody what to do, you are limited by you. Like you can't get beyond however your height, your ceiling is you. But and that's a terrible place to be. And so he's reaping what he's sown with that kind of system. And I don't know where it goes from here.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Parks White here says dozens of Wagner recruitment officers in Russia still recruiting. BBC has even they ran an article where they've actually phoned through and gone through. So they are still recruiting. It's this bizarre situation where,
but it'll go into the Russian. I'm sorry, it'll go into the Russian
right.
MOD. They're recruiting in Kazakhstan. They're recruiting all over the country. So I don't see that that's going to go to revitalize Wagner. It'll just go into the Russian MOD, and they need it now because they just took Wagner off the battlefield, which, oops.
Yeah. So that's like 25,000 troops, 5,000 probably elite troops. Suddenly, the only people that were having tangible successes on the Ukrainian front, as far as the Russians are concerned, and they've taken them out of the equation. But it's odd that you can go to prison for 10 years for distributing leaflets about Ukraine, but you can shoot down 6 or plus Russian helicopters and get a free pass.
Right. And that's why it doesn't make any sense. How do you give them amnesty? And so now what I've read, and I'm not sure of the sources here, but they had like Prigozhin's family, or they raided his house, and he had $40 million sitting around in a suitcase. I'm looking in all my suitcases now just to see if I can find some, some loose change or whatever. They shut down a troll farm. They were trying to put as much pressure on him as possible. So maybe that was part of the deal. But if you're just shooting down 6 helicopters, how do you get amnesty? I just can't understand. That's part of the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
So
this question, and I would really be interested in your answer into where I'm going to take this question. So Jonathan says, Robert Amity, do you think that a common person in Russia knows what's happening in Ukraine? Is it propaganda too much for them to really know? Right. So I'm going to take this in this direction. Thank you for the question, by the way. I don't think Russian people know what's going on particularly. There will be some people who have got VPNs, so virtual private networks that can pretend to be in other countries to access other medias, and they might have better idea. But then you're still got confirmation biases, so you're going to seek out information that supports your own identity and beliefs and whatever. So it's unlikely that most Russian people are going to know what's going on. But more importantly, Putin doesn't know what's going on. So we know, and I keep saying this, but this is so important. Putin doesn't have a smartphone, doesn't check the internet, has not trusted the internet, thinks it's a CIA tool. So he gets everything past him in different colored folders, but this is curated information being given to him by people, but he can't then disconfirm or confirm that evidence without going back to the very people who've given him those folders, or other people who are equally just as likely to curate the evidence given the information given to him. So Putin is in his own bubble in probably an even more fundamental way than the Russian public are. And when you are a decision maker at the top of a very autocratic system, that is a massive problem, because you are garbage in, garbage out. You are unable to make decent decisions. I think it explains why he went to war in the very first place here. Right. And it was a special military operation to begin with that became a war accidentally, and for as far as he's concerned, and that is explicable by point of fact that he just has very poor information, doesn't have a grasp on reality. What do you have to say to that?
No, I think you're right. Let's go back to the original question that he asked, which was about the idea that do the Russians actually have information? They do, but it's all filtered through RT and all the other whatever services, RIA or TASS or whoever. So they're only getting a very slanted view to begin with, and then there are some. I heard early in the war, VPNs were selling like hotcakes in Russia. I mean, they were going very fast. Like, so some are getting it, but again, your broader point about Putin like being in a bubble, that's huge. Now, Putin's bubble was what caused it in the first place, you said. And think about this. FSB officers were buying up apartments in Kyiv, which tells me, like, early on, like before the war started, like they were quietly buying up these apartments so that, like, when the transition happened, they, you know, could have the nicest digs and accommodations. So they
Really?
thought this would, yeah, I've read about that, and this is legitimate journalistic stuff that where I got that from. And so they sincerely thought that this was going to be over in a very short period of time. But like, what war started where they're like, we're going to go to the war and it's going to be years, right? Oh, we'll be home by Christmas. Don't every like every group that when they first going to war, they think that. So they were way over optimistic because of that bubble. But it's because in an authoritarian system, you can't tell the boss no. You can't tell him what he doesn't want to hear. Not if you protect or value your own neck. So I think that's a lot of what's going on there. And I think that's still going on. Putin has to have been getting wise to what's going on at this point. But I gave the example today about how I think he's already kind of paranoid, and that happens to most authoritarians. They become paranoid. They have to become paranoid after a period of time because of the way the system works. And it's like he's already paranoid, and now he's gone down a dark alley and almost got mugged, and now he's extra paranoid. So we'll, I think, see a purge. I mean, Survikin, it looks like he's been purged, as far as I can tell. We don't exactly know, but it looks like Survikin's off the playing field. How many other generals? I saw one article in legitimate news services that talked about 14 generals might have been involved with this. Like, if that's true, that's huge. And that creates all kinds of inefficiencies for the Russian military that's already inefficient. So, I mean, I think there's more to come, and we'll see it in time.
Yeah, the fact that Surovikin is still absent without leave is really interesting. I don't know if you've heard rumors as well concerning Ramzan Kadyrov possibly being on his deathbed. That's come out in the last 24 hours, although
Is that right?
completely unsubstantiated. But there are a lot of rumors, as in a lot of people are saying this. So his son, he's got a young son that is sometimes you see on the socials, has put out a really kind of glowing tweet about him, which is kind of a weird thing to do if you know he wasn't on his deathbed, that kind of thing. But I just wanted to go to this question, which is, do you think, so that thanks for Paul Good Deberitz, do you think Putin actually is off digital tech? Sounds like something he's put out to set the story up to blame others. Apparently this is fairly general knowledge. I mean, if you just check around the internet, he basically there are plenty of articles on this. It is general knowledge. Whether it's true, of course, there's a non-zero chance that this is untrue. But Putin refuses to use the internet because he's afraid people will spy on him. The Wall Street Journal. This is going back to December 2022, but actually this has gone back. I wrote an article on this before the war, maybe at the very beginning of the war, talking about exactly this and talking about him being given different colored folders by people. You know, he has everything in paper. It's mentioned in this Slate article about the future of the internet in Russia. He just completely is completely suspicious. He's a paranoid person, apparently, anyway. And that, I don't know, you might know, is paranoia something that is more common in autocratic leaders? I imagine if you're the only person at the top of a very thin pillar, everyone is your potential enemy.
Absolutely. And the longer you're there, the more paranoid you become. So if you're a dictator that's been there for 20 years, and he's been a soft dictator in the sense that he's been elected, but still, like, how legit were the elections, kind of thing. And if you look at what he's done to Russia and the rights that they've lost since the war began, like, it's pretty crazy. The Duma as just ramming things through. And I talked about this yesterday. Like, when you're united, like, we're supposed to be at odds with each other. Like, I like watching the British Parliament, because we don't get to do that in the American Congress. We don't get to say, and besides, the gentleman doesn't even know what a brain is. Ha 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 ha. Here, right? I mean, I love it. I think it's awesome, right? But the natural state of human beings who have freedom is to disagree. Like, we agree on the most important things, and then after that we see it differently. That's okay. But when you're united, and by the way, Ukraine, their Verkhonorova Rada is also very united because there's a threat. So the Duma, the way that they react, I watch that very carefully. They haven't had a lot of split votes lately. They've had a lot of really unanimous votes. They feel that same threat when they're doing that, when they're locking down their people's freedoms or taking away rights that were otherwise there. Like you go to jail for holding up a blank sign in Russia. That's pretty crazy. So now at a protest, you can't call it a war. Yeah. I mean, so it's those kind of things.
All the activities that are taking place in Russia, over the last 500 days almost, we all have our Russian trolls, but when they come on and have a go at, say, Ukraine making a law where it's more difficult to talk openly about certain things to do with operational security or this or that, and they attack, the liberty or making rules about language and this or that, and you're going, hang on, you're coming from a pro-Russian point of view, and you're saying that Ukraine are being somehow, anti-liberty. Look at every single regulation that has been passed. Look at everything that's going on in Russia at the moment, and tell me what is anti-liberty. Whether it's Ukraine or Russia.
Go back before the war and look. Like what Ukraine has done is largely roll back what Russia or Soviet Union did to Ukraine with they took away the Russian speaking law. Well, that's because you imposed it on them, right? So it's those kind of things. Oh, well, what about Minsk? Let's go back to Budapest Memorandum and think about, the U.S., the U.K., and Russia were supposed to be guaranteeing their borders. So Minsk doesn't really matter if you violated that one. Like, that's the problem. But they'll never start in the right place. And the trolls, they say the same stuff. It's almost boring dealing with trolls. Like, I don't know about your trolls, but my trolls, they're repetitive. And you can hear like the same, like almost verbatim the same language, and you're like, okay, ignore this one, ignore that one, or so.
So here's the thing: trolls. I have a long history with trolls, or at least with as maybe a bit unfair. So, as you know, you and I have completely different political and religious beliefs, right? And that's fair. But with getting involved with philosophy of religion, I'm obsessed with being correct myself, because if I'm wrong, I can't sleep with being incorrect, right? So I need to know that I'm correct, but when someone else is incorrect, I feel I have to kind of correct them. Right? It's an obsession of mine that I have. And so if someone comes onto my threads, outside of this context, so when in the last 12 years or so of writing articles about politics and religion, if someone comes onto my thread and says something that I disagree with, I'm going to call them out. And but let's have a respectful argument about this. But I will happily argue with anyone about anything. And the problem is you then take that to trolls whose job it is to spread disinformation, and they're not doing it. I've had plenty of debates in other contexts with non-good faith actors, but people who are paid non-good faith actors, they're literally paid to be incorrect. And sometimes I wonder what they really think in their own heads. I know I've got to do this, but do they at any point think, and I know it's wrong? Do you wonder if trolls are actually that astute?
They're pretty bad at what they do. Like, they're not even, like, when you argue with somebody who's on the other side of something and they actually care about the thing, they're too emotional, but they care about it, and they keep coming back with good, like, trying to say something, right? The trolls are just trying to I got paid for that one. I got paid for that one. It's just bad. It's not even good, like, arguments. It doesn't really do much. And so they're probably not worth the money. Now, I've seen some effective disinformation campaigns, like in France, for example, and I talked about this about 3 weeks ago. They actually were creating false images of Le Monde and other newspapers, and they were trying to, they would change some of the things to make it pro-Russia about those articles and leave the rest alone. And you wouldn't know if you click through, you'd think you were on the rest of Le Monde. That was pretty clever, right? So it was trying to bias people without them knowing it. But trolls on just making comments on YouTube videos, they're bad, and I think they're ineffective. They're probably not worth the money. That's just my
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're effective for people who are already siding in that way and who will jump on with confirmation bias. So if you're anti-war, say in the US or the UK, if you're anti or not anti-war, if you are anti-Ukraine for some reason, slightly pro-Russian, and you see those comments, you will jump on that and say, "Yeah, that confirms my position." And they might have effect there, but yeah, you're right. For most other people, maybe.
Now that brings us to another issue. So I do these reaction videos because my whole shtick is I try to provide context. I don't try to do daily updates anymore. Many months ago, I stopped doing that. And I'm just trying to help you see a little bit more about how things are going. So I started doing these reaction videos to Redacted and Duran and Colonel McGregor, Scott Ritter, these kind of guys, right? I've never seen more troll activity as I have when I got into so here you see RT editor there at the bottom, and then if you go down a little bit further, you'll see Colonel McGregor below that, or Jackson Hinkle next to that, these kind of things, right? But I never saw more activity from trolls than when I'm doing one of those videos, because people are coming to those videos. They might be coming because they're pro Duran. And then they get there and they make an argument, but the trolls are in there as well, saying the Duran is the best. How they say it? They give the best geopolitical analysis of anyone out there, but they'll say the same thing again and again, like after you hear it 17 times, you're like, really? Like nobody has said the same thing about me 17 times. So the exact same way, the trolls are very heavy in that space. On other videos, they ebb and flow, but in that space, it's particularly dense.
And actually, and I made this warning to people the other day, and I don't want to get into the long weeds of like the 2016 election in the US and the Brexit election, Brexit referendum in the UK, but just to let people know going forward, rather than looking back. So I've talked about how the trolls meddle in our elections, and this has been proven. It's not the collusion discussion. That's a whole different thing. This is not Russian collusion. This is Russian meddling, just interfering in elections. Now they've been shown, like Facebook and Twitter have admitted that the Russians interfered in the 2016 and 2020 election and the Brexit elections. But let's not get an argument about that. But going forward, right, don't think that Russian trolls are just on our YouTube war videos, right? That's not what they were employed originally for. They were employed before the war started, right? Sure. What were they doing? What were they doing since Prigozhin started that? And he's already said they were meddling in the elections, they are meddling in the elections, and they will meddle in the elections. That's what Prigozhin himself said. So irrespective of what you think about the 2016 election and Brexit, we need to be careful going forward that Russian and apparently now Chinese will not be influencing our democratic elections in insidious and nefarious ways.
That's right. So Rebecca Koffler has an interesting book. It's really well done. It's called Putin's Playbook. I would highly recommend that you find it and read it. Her thesis was that they were doing exactly what you said. They were trying to meddle in the 2016 election in the US, but they weren't setting up a Manchurian candidate in Trump. They were simply trying to sow discord, right? And then after the election, they would sow, like, let's use race as an example. So racial division on one side and that's the book. Racial division on one side and racial division on the other. So it didn't matter if you were pro Black Lives Matter or pro white supremacy. They would just continue to troll, because the idea was to try to get people at odds with each other. And they actually thought, if she's correct, they actually thought that they were making it rough for Hillary when she would be elected. And surprise, it turned out to be Trump instead. So they were caught off guard, but they were just trying to sow discord. And it didn't matter who it was. Like, I don't think Hillary would have been much more successful than Trump in the last term, because we were just so at each other. So I was just talking about how we have different opinions, but we amplified it, and it was vitriolic. And it shouldn't be like that. We should be able to, look, I like Jonathan. We disagree about things. That's okay. He's still a good person. Like, he doesn't have to agree with me that he's made in the image of God. I see him that way. He doesn't have to. That's okay. Right? We can have different opinions. It's all right. But as soon as I'm starting like, well, you're this and you're that, well, now it's changed. right? We can have a rational discussion. I miss the old time liberals. Like we seem to have moved away from that in the US. And just like on the left, they miss like conservatives that are thinking through things and want to have that argument about things, right?
Yeah.
That's how we should be. And the trolls have made it to the point where we get more and more angry and at each other. And that's bad. So
yeah,
you're
I think that's really
right
good.
the word.
Yeah. I think it really correct. I've been saying, and it's going to be really interesting. I'm going to get Putin's playbook, but I've been talking a lot about how trolls will defend the left or the right or whoever it is in any country. That it doesn't matter as long as it sows discord, and that's fomenting like discord is their job. And you know it. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, really good point. I look forward to checking that book out. If we go to,
let me add one more thing to that. So if you're Putin and it's early February of 2022, and you see the U.S. at each other's throat, and you see the way that we left Afghanistan, and you see all the other issues going on from the past few years, you're thinking maybe my advisors are right. Maybe this is a good time. Yeah. Hi, I'm an old time Republican. I would call myself a Reagan conservative. And you got to understand that there's a bunch of us. We're just quiet. We're not loud, trying to yell everyone down. So, by the way, Pence is like that. Pence was just meeting in Kyiv with Zelensky, offering, saying, hey, look, we're with you. We're supporting you. And you got to understand
how that CNN interview that he did was really, really good, and it's like that's brilliant. But not a lot of people like Pence.
Yeah, 6 of the 9 Republican candidates are pro-Ukraine. So, and you say, well, it doesn't matter because it's all Trump. This time in the 2016 cycle, this many months out, Trump was 7th place. So a lot could change. So just try to keep that in perspective.
Yeah. So moving sideways to the counteroffensive as a whole, and I know that you're not necessarily, or nor am I, any kind of great military analyst here. What are your general thoughts about the counteroffensive? What are your thoughts on the messaging that particularly from media? Western media concerning the counteroffensive and whether it is going to plan, going too slowly, or what you'd expect given the Russians have had all this time to dig themselves in, etc., etc.
Yeah, Kharkiv has given us this false sense that they were going to take more ground than they could realistically, all other things being equal. They had time to dig in, so they have to get through defense lines. Colonel McGregor's last video this morning that I saw was talking about they'll never get through the defensive lines. And then I went over to what's the 4-minute one that does the analysis without
reporting from Ukraine.
Reporting for Ukraine. Well, they went through the first, second, and third lines here by going at night, and so it's happening, but it's happening very slowly. I think Jake Bro is the best as far as his comment that, like, look at Pearl Harbor, or not Pearl Harbor, look at D-Day, and look how long it took for them to break out. It took a month and a half to not just get on the ground, but then to break out and move through. And then the trolls would say things like, "Oh, it's not the same. That was naval warfare. It doesn't matter. It's the same principle. It takes a time to get that beachhead and then to break through and figure out where they're going to be. Most of Ukraine's forces are still in reserves, so they're trying to find out where they can get through and then punch through. So I'm not. I'm sad that it's taking so long, but I'm not pessimistic about it. I just think they've got to figure this out. And again, wars are going to be. What did Milley say yesterday? That it's going to be a long, bloody offensive. It will. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, people are they're putting up the obstacles that they can put up. So I'm not terribly worried about it. It'll happen over time. There's nothing I can really do to influence it, except for say, relax. Just wait for things to fall into place as they need to fall into place. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think they probably were hoping that it would go slightly quicker than it has done, but then a really good analysis of where the Russians were at in terms of minefields and dug-in defenses, spending months and months to prepare themselves. I think one should really have predicted it would be like this. It's interesting that some people are mentioning that Normandy Bocage, which is this kind of landscape that you see a lot of that the Ukrainians are trying to fight through here. So if we look at this, not there, if we look, the blockage was also significant during the Battle of Normandy in World War II, as it made progress against the German defenders difficult. Plots of land were divided by ancient rows of dirt alongside irrigation ditches. Thick vegetation on these dirt mounds could recreate walls up to 16 feet high. A typical square mile on the battlefield might contain hundreds of irregular hedged enclosures. In response, rhino tanks filled with bocage cutting modifications were developed. American personnel usually referred to bocage as hedgerows. The German army also used sunken lanes to implement strong point, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. The point is that actually, although you might think that's really easy landscape to navigate in terms of an armed defensive maneuver, it's actually quite difficult considering they are full of mines. So mines, I think, mines are just the major aspect of this war at the moment, and that's possibly a lesson going forward. Is that any defending army with an absolute ton of mines at their fingertips can present a really big problem for an attacking force. And we are expecting. I said in one of my videos this morning, it was a quote that we the West are expecting, or allies are expecting Ukraine to make progress. We expect them to do things that we wouldn't expect our army to do. Right? NATO and Western armies, we wouldn't expect them to do this without air superiority. They don't have air superiority.
Yeah, and that's the trick.
So what are you going to do? Like, this is going to be slow and attritional. But once you do get the breakthroughs, one assumes that then it becomes suddenly quickly. Not a lot happens for a long time, and then everything happens all at once. So that's what, and I think that what's really happening is that Ukrainians are successfully fixing Russian troops in certain places and attriting them, and that will allow. So Bakhmut at the moment is doing a really good job of sucking troops from all different areas to Bakhmut, which is exactly what it was doing when Russia were attacking. Now that the Ukrainians are attacking, the same is happening.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just got excited. The fascinating thing about that, though, is that they're doing it there because it's too much of a political loss to then lose Bakhmut. And so it's not even that you really need that ground, but the Russians have to defend it. And so it is there. You can almost hear the sucking sound from here. Like they have to get drawn to it. And so there's a really interesting, both like the war is military, it's informational, it's geopolitical, it's economic, it's all these layers one upon the other. And if we understand that, it becomes a little bit clearer. So what else do you see like in a counteroffensive? Because it's been a lot slower. I mean, you're only talking less than 100 square miles maybe so far, but that's still progress.
I think what you need to be looking out for is what's going on behind the Russian lines. So the Storm Shadow missiles, the HIMARS, the artillery is absolutely hammering the Russian logistics and the troop accumulations, and probably damaging the morale to a great extent as well. So that actually you are making the Russians. There could be a point where the Russians just don't have. So there was a huge Rykova about a week ago. There was a massive explosion that took like 6 hours to burn out all the ammunition, just a load of stores, and that's things like that have happened. Not as big as that, but at various places and times. You will get to a point, I think, soon where the Russians just don't have the ammunition and supplies to supply their army on the front line, and you'll get an attrition of stuff behind the lines that makes the operation on the front lines really, really difficult. And at that point, you might start seeing some successful breakthroughs. So I think it's not just about the movement of troops on the front line, but actually what's happening behind. And I think all the right things are happening behind really quite significantly as well. And it's why I said recently that the Storm Shadow really was a game changer in the same way that HIMARS were a game changer. I think that with that.
And to move full circle, you just took Wagner off the battlefield. You just took the successful, and you have Kadyrov, who's kind of glitzy and glamorous, but we don't know that he can actually fight. So yeah, so it's looking pretty not good in that sense. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy or quick or anything along those lines, but it just okay. Well, at any rate, that's I would not want to be a Russian general in charge of this, because you're not likely to win. I don't see it's going to, if you win, it's only going to be because something lucked your direction, not because you were really prepared and you really did the right, like something had to be a fluke. And if you don't win, you're going to get blamed. Putin's not taking the heat for it. He's going to be blaming his general. So Yeah, that's a bad place to be.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much, King Raccoon. Thanks to Sean Lindsay as well. If you've got any super chats, please get them in to get your questions to us. We'd love to answer your questions, so that would be absolutely fabulous. Thank you for all of your support. Yeah, it's interesting. I had these sort of, you lie in bed at night thinking, right, stuff like, what would I do if I was Putin? And then you're like, well, okay, well, I wouldn't be Putin, but morally,
I understand. Yeah. I've had the same thought. I get it. I'm trying to understand his mind, and you have to kind of put yourself in his shoes, which is a really weird experience.
So yeah, so well, Georgie answered this from, well, I wouldn't be, I would get out of Ukraine, but he meant that actually from a serious point of view. Is actually, if I was Putin, like the best thing they can do is get out of Ukraine. Actually, for him, arguably the best thing they can do, because I don't think he can win. Therefore, it's cutting your losses. So, but it's a sunk cost fallacy. There's psychology, so much psychology involved in decision making, as well. In looking at leadership, it's all about the information you've got, your kind of your background, who you are, what your context is, and all the biases and heuristics you have operating inside your mind, and the sunk cost fallacy here is going to be playing a massive part for someone who is a strongman dictator who can never make bad decisions, has clearly never made a bad decision in his life, right? So, this one is a humdinger of a bad decision, but he can't admit that. So, but the best thing to do would be to pull out and say, yeah, do you know what? It's a mistake. Sorry about that. Tail between the legs, go back to everyone. And I don't know whether he would last longer politically than if he continued to do this and wait for some kind of coup. I don't know. What's your thought?
I can't see a way forward for Putin. So he's hoping. So over time, he's hoping that over time the West will lose interest, and they'll be getting stronger somehow by maybe getting missiles from North Korea or Iran or something, and something will break his way. So he's betting on time. Over that same period of time, Ukraine is getting stronger with better and better weapons. Now they're losing people, that's true, but they're still getting stronger and stronger. They're far stronger than they were 480 days ago, right? And so Ukraine's getting stronger, but I think there's a curvilinear relationship where it's going to eventually go, whether they lose Western partners or something. It's not going to be. So Putin's hoping for this. I don't think that's legitimate. I mean, that's like, hope is not a method, right? But he's hoping for that. But I think so. Time is going to be a factor, and I'm not sure how it'll play out. I remember at New Year's Day talking about how I hope the war is over this time next year, and I'm not talking about it, but I think we're still going to be here this time next year. And I hate to say that, but I think that's the reality. So I think Ukraine's going to take some ground, but it's still going to be a long, hard slog, and it's going to be a long time. But I can't see any way that Putin can get off. Like, what does he do? How does he save face? How does he? We've killed all the Nazis. They're all gone now. We can go home. They can't do that. Like, and he's getting pushed from his ultranationalists just as much as he is like wanting to get his victory himself. He can't give up the oblast. Like he's like the monkey that put his hand in the cookie jar and now he's holding on to the cookies and he can't let go. And so he's stuck. It's that, or, banana or whatever it is. So he's stuck and he just can't seem to let go. So that I just don't see it.
I mean, I'm sorry to bore my readers yet again, Darren, but I wrote this back in April the 4th, 2022. So this is really early into the war. And I said then, where to now, Putin? Because there is no way you can win. So this is back in 2022. And I've read this since. And do you know what? It stands up completely now. Like a year plus later, it's exactly the same situation.
Well, the author was a smart guy.
Hey, sorry?
The author was a smart guy.
Naturally, yeah, of course. Yes, I have to agree. But, let me repeat, I say in bold, he cannot win. There's no conceptual scenario where this could happen. When you've, and this goes back to the special military operation being what was originally intended, removal of the Zelensky regime or the Zelensky government, That didn't happen, so they're stuck in Ukraine with a bunch of soldiers. Now they're in a war. Now it's not a special military operation. Now that there's resistance, as soon as there's resistance, you've got a country of that size, and you've got 40 odd million people that don't want you to be there. You ain't going to win. You can't have the country. So then it's like, we'll have this much of the country. Okay, that's not going to happen. We pulled back from Kiev because our army isn't good enough. We'll have this much. We'll have this much. We'll have this much. And it gets to like plan E, which is like, let's take Bakhmut. And like even that, they didn't quite succeed. There's like 2% of Bakhmut they still don't control, supposedly. So you're like, okay, you can't even take Bakhmut. So what is your winning? I don't think there is any winning unless the West come in and say, right, we're going to freeze a conflict. No one fights anymore, and you're going to have to give up Crimea, or Crimea becomes like independent and controlled by NATO or something like that.
I think he's hoping for a frozen conflict, a North-South Korea kind of scenario. He would be happy to take that and just hold on to whatever he can hold on to. But I can't see any scenario where he can win in any meaningful sense. Because remember, if he loses, there's reparations on the other side. There's all kinds of consequences. Potentially the Hague, which I don't prefer. I want to see Putin stand in court in Kyiv. That's what I want to see. I don't know that I'll get that, but that's what ought to happen. That on the land that he's transgressed so much against, that's where he ought to stand trial. But anyway,
I mean, he's a pariah going forward, and like he can't travel to most countries in the world that he might want to. Yeah, okay, good luck. You can go to China, North Korea, and maybe South Africa later in this year. But I think he's really shot himself in the foot. Everything that he's publicly said were his intentions, objectives in this war have been like demilitarization. That ain't happened. Denazification, where you've thrown in more Russian Nazis. Expansion of NATO, yeah, you successfully done that. Unity of EU, you didn't want that. Well, that's happened. All this kind of stuff. He's just like shot himself in the foot.
So you mentioned China, and I know we're time, we're near time, right? So, but China is really interesting to me, and that is that Xi was looking at this and watching. Xi didn't pack his play. I find that absolutely fascinating. Xi doesn't want this to keep going on. The new Silk Road goes through part of Ukraine as well. He wants this thing to be done with so he can get his business going, right? So Xi's a really interesting character. A severely weakened Russia like this, it hurts Xi's Taiwan ambition, because who's going to back his play? Right? It's just China doesn't want to do it, wouldn't want to do it alone. He'd be much more comfortable with a strong Russia behind him, just like Russia would be more comfortable with a strong China behind him, I think. And so what's happening or not happening in China is really interesting. China was having a conference with the stans, the Kazakhstan and all the other stans, without Russia. And the presidents and prime ministers of the stans are like, yeah, we're not really coming to see you, Putin. We're gonna skip this one. We're right. I mean, it's really interesting to see just geopolitically how his strongman magnet is a lot weaker. Putin's magnet is a lot weaker than what it used to be, and China is like the canary in the coal mine to show you what's going on.
Absolutely agree. And I think it's really interesting to see the posturing of some of those Caucasus, those nations around Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan are being really kind of difficult for Russia at the moment. So not only has he lost a lot of power with regards and standing with regard to the Western powers, if you like, in the classic kind of Cold War scenario, but he's actually losing a lot of influence locally too. And as you say, China, it's all about what they're not doing. And I said before that China, I think, stand to win even more if Ukraine if Russia lose the war. I think China would just go in and help themselves to hydrocarbons.
Russia will be its gas station and its provider of stuff, but it's going to turn that big brother relationship into a little brother relationship. That's what's going to happen.
Vassal state, and some saying it already is. How many square kilometers of the Russian winter campaign, Ukraine, June? I'm not sure the question quite there, Javier, but thank you very much for the super chat. I think that actually, the Russians the Ukrainians have taken more, even though it's been slow going and attritional, they have taken more square kilometerage, if that's a word, than the Russians did in the equivalent time. You look at what they've done just around Bakhmut. They've taken more around Bakhmut. And I think today there's rumors coming out that there's maybe some gains for the Ukrainians around Bakhmut. I think it's all happening there at the moment. So yeah, it's yes, it's slow for the Ukrainians, but actually they're doing better than the Russians did in their supposed offensive.
So roll the clock back to this time last year. We're in July of 2023, and in July of 2022, that's where I was pulling my hair out about like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and the Russians just looked like unstoppable. Like they just kept rolling over stuff. And then there was this huge period where they couldn't take anything. And I think they're just kind of they petered out of their offensive capability because they rely heavily on artillery, and they just didn't have it. Like the way that they would go in, like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk was just to obliterate the city. When they don't have artillery, they don't have it. Their planes, they have planes, but they don't want to leave Russian territory in those planes, right? They want to shoot their missiles from far away and not get shot down. So, yeah, that was a great question that this person just asked about, how much territory. It doesn't strike me like the Russians have done much better in the winter campaign than the Ukrainians have in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think it's a case that the Russians have culminated. I mean, they really have culminated. They just don't have the mechanized equipment. They don't have the troops. They need a full-on national mobilization if they want any hope of succeeding in this war. But even then, that's throwing troops at the problem rather than throwing mechanized equipment and serious stuff to actually solve their problems.
Well, maybe they should use their missiles not on the civilian population, but on military targets rather than a pizzeria.
That's a great segue. So I really wanted to talk to you about this. I know you probably not got too much time left. If people have got super chats, please get them in to us. That'd be really fantastic. This is just something you spend quite a bit of time looking at people like Julia Davis and the translations of the propagandists, I know, and what they say and break it down for your viewers. Here, this was in response to the Kramatorsk missile that hit the pizzeria recently. There was absolutely. Yeah. Well, they said they did hit it. First of all, it was like, yeah, we didn't hit it. It was false flag. And then they're like, oh yeah, we did hit it, and it was a successful hit. Thank you very much. And you're like, really? It was a pizzeria. You've killed 14-year-old twin girls and a 17-year-old girl there. Yeah, thanks for that. Anyway, here's this guy saying, and the video, if you play it, shows all the horrible sort of visuals. I'm not going to show that, but quote, listen, this strike on Kramatorsk is just chic. I take my hat off to whoever planned it and carried it out. The song is simple, just a song. My old military heart rejoices, says the Russian General Andrei Kartapolov, rejoicing on Solovyov's program. I mean, it's morally abhorrent is my take on that. But what do you say about the propagandists? Because actually they seem to change their tune. If we go full circle back to Prigozhin, they've now started to come out and say, yeah, Wagner took 11 months before. It's like, Wagner's done brilliant. They've taken Bakhmut. And now they're like, they've taken 11 months to take Bakhmut. And that was all rubbish. They're coming out against Wagner to toe the party line.
Yeah.
What's your view?
They're going to disappear from the media. Would you just watch? It'll all be rewritten to be all Russian Ministry of Defense. Okay. Short answer. So for people who rely on propaganda so much, they're really bad at it. Like they're just really bad at it. They'll say one thing one time and then say another thing another and contradict themselves. And it's like they don't even seem to care. Like, I mean, how can you like? It's almost like, think about the weatherman. The weatherman can get the weather wrong and still have his job, but we get it. It's the weather. It's hard to predict. They're like the weatherman, but they're making it up. They should be able to sing the same tune instead of being involved. Like I spent a lot of time debunking propaganda. That's probably almost half of what I do is looking at RT and American mouthpieces and Western mouthpieces that are then, regurgitating that and just listening to them and hearing what they have to say and then poking the holes in it. But we listen to it because we get nuances that help us understand them more fully. right? As opposed to how I would naturally think about things and you would naturally think about things. We have to understand how they're seeing it and how they're explaining it to their audience and how they're saying it to the West. Or when they write an RT article, I have done this a number of times. I've taken that same RT article, highlighted it, and popped it into Google, and then you see it exactly wholesale into an Arab newspaper and a African newspaper and an Indian newspaper, and right, it's the same article that they just, so they know that they're just spreading their propaganda. So what they're saying is very important because we're consuming that.
What do you have to say to this? I mean, isn't that the strategy, though? Push out as many pieces of disinformation as possible. It's kind of this fire hose approach. Russian propaganda is designed to be a fire hose of lies, attacking the idea.
That's the Rand article, the fire hose of falsehood, right? So they are trying to do that, but if you're trying to make sense, so this is why it's hard. Like, you see something from a Western newspaper that says X number of Russians have been killed, but then you see something in the RT that's saying that a very small number of Russians have been killed and 10 times as many Ukrainians have been killed, but you can't hang your hat on that. So we're kind of half blind in trying to understand what's going on. Anything that RT says, like, if they said 2 + 2 is 4, I'd still question it and go, okay, let me count that, right? Because they just lie so frequently that you have to prove and verify and triangulate, and it's a really mind-numbing thing to understand. But you have to understand that they actually do, like on Russian Media Monitor does a great job with this. They put out these clips of what they're actually saying for the Russian audience, and then they translate it in English so that we can see it. And what they're saying is horrifying, but you wouldn't believe me if I told you like what they actually said unless you saw it with your own eyes. And then we go through it and we unpack it. And so if this is how they're thinking, what do you think they think about this? Or like we start to unpack and help viewers understand what's going on. And I think that that's a valuable thing if you want to understand the context of who's going to do what next and why.
Yeah, and this idea of like contradictory, sorry, that's wrong one there. Contradictory claims being thrown out. The fire hose is all about different points of view to flood the market with confusion. Vlad Vexel has talked about this a number of times, where he says that actually it appears to be a strategy for the Russians to throw out all these different ideas to see which one falls. It's like the sowing of the seeds and on which one falls on fertile grounds, to give you a biblical analogy, Professor Gerdes.
I wouldn't compare it that way, but okay, I get it.
Oh yeah, the word of God and Russian disinformation. Yeah, I see. I see what you're saying.
I wouldn't put that together,
but that's the kind of idea, which is like throw out all these seeds and see which one of those lands well, and then learn something from that is possibly what the Russians are trying to do, and that's why you're seeing all that sort of confused narrative.
Right, but then you have the boy that cried wolf. Now we can't believe you about anything. And so when you say that we didn't target a pizzeria, but you clearly did, and we have evidence, and either your missiles are really bad or you targeted it. So which is it? Like,
but that's you're right. But that's for us, and of course we're not their target audience. So for their own domestic audience, they unquestionably believe like the main like threads and
That's why you saw those people with the Wagner flag cheering, we are Russia, because that's what they're feeding on. So, I mean, it all makes sense. But you have to do the homework and really see this in order to have it make sense. Otherwise, you just go, how can these people do that? And when you're just saying, if you're saying the equivalent of what's wrong with you, you're not understanding the other side, right? That's not a good place to be. Like, you could say that about me, or I could say that, but that's not good. But if I understand why you say what you're saying, oh, okay, then it makes sense. Now we can actually find some kind of way of understanding what's going to happen next and why, and that's really important. So, all right, well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, as we move somewhere near the end, guys, if you've got any questions, get them in now. You've seen this before, which is one of my viewers. He's compiled the daily. These are the general staff figures, the Ukrainian figures for the Russian losses. This and just brilliant. So thank you so much for Dell for putting this together. This is the artillery. You were talking about artillery losses and that being really significant, and they were successful earlier in the war when they had a huge amount of artillery hitting certain towns. Well, if you see over time, they are losing obviously more and more each day, as in they don't gain artillery. And this is when you were saying earlier about the asymmetry. This is a point that I I belabor so often, which is every single day when I say this nation is giving this amount of stuff to Ukraine, this nation is giving this nation is giving this nation is giving this. Every single tab I open and say this is what they're giving, the question it should then be, what's Russia getting? And it's always, well, nothing. Okay, this nation's giving this, what Russia getting? Nothing. Nothing. Okay, they're getting Shahed drones, they're getting a few bits and pieces, but nothing significant. They're going to have to make them. How do they make them with sanctions? Well, they can't really very easily. So there's a huge asymmetry that develops, which means that with every passing day, the Ukrainians are getting upgraded, and every passing day, the Russians are getting degraded. And when you look at the numbers here for artillery, and you look at the last few 2 months really, the steepness of that blue line indicates that the Ukrainians are absolutely hammering the artillery pieces. And for every one that the Russians lose, they don't have it sitting behind that last piece. They've got to go and get that from somewhere else. Where are they getting it from? Is it a decent piece? Is it up to scratch? Are they taking it from somewhere else? Are they robbing Peter to pay Paul? And so on and so forth. So this is, I think, just this graph alone is incredibly significant. So going back to the question of where are they in terms of the counteroffensive, I think that they are at a point where they're dangerously attriting the Russian capabilities. I don't know if you have anything else to add. I know that's kind of going over old ground there.
Well, if I listen to Scott Ritter, or if you listen to McGregor, not filtered by me, you would hear the Russians are going to win next week. I would be embarrassed if I said that every week for the last year and a half and nothing has actually changed or happened like that. And these guys are just amazing to watch. Like he keeps saying, well, they're right around the corner. It's not. It can't possibly be. Yes, they might have deep pockets of ammunition, but at a certain point, it's going to run out.
Was it Colonel McGregor that deleted his early YouTube channel videos or whole channel because, and then there's all his early videos have disappeared? One thinks because
it's very hard to find his early videos. I have found a few, and his predictions have been very bad over time. So yeah, I have found a few. Scott Ritter's are just as bad. But again, it's they have these assumptions. Like Scott Ritter, I believe, actually really believes it. I'm not sure about some of the other cast of characters. Like McGregor, I think just doesn't like the U.S. generals. I think that's part of what's motivating him.
Right,
and
yeah.
he just, there's a big chip on his shoulder that's only matched by the chip on his other shoulder. And then there are folks like.
Would you not say that that's the same for Scott Ritter though, because of his involvement with the law, shall we say?
Yeah,
but also the weapons
more
of
than
mass.
that. It's more than that with Ritter, though, because with Ritter married a Georgian woman, loves all things Russia, and he's a Russophile. Like he really, really loved Russia. I don't see that in McGregor. Now there's people like Jackson Hinkle that I think are just trying to turn a buck, and he thinks that he can talk about this and he'll have an audience and so they're in different places, but trying to understand them has been people are like, how are you not nauseous watching these guys? Well, I watch it with like just a curiosity of why they would say that. It's almost like a doctor looking at a naked body is not like thinking what an average person would think. They're very clinical about it, and that's how I have to do that, or it would be nauseating. I mean, just some of the things they say are crazy, but then I can help unpack that. And so anyway,
I find that really interesting to do with like the Donbass Davushka as well. If you remember the US servicewoman or former servicewoman who became this pro-Russian shill, and it's always what's going on in your life? There's always very interesting like psychologies going on and sociological situations that inform these people and make them do what they do or lead to them doing what they do. It's fascinating. So what you obviously spend quite a lot of time delving into these people and the Duran and whatnot. Do you want to speak to who they are? Like some people might not know about Duran.
Yeah. So I have a playlist on my on my YouTube page that has like reaction videos, and you can just like look at them, and then I'll let them speak, and then I'll just comment on what they've said. But I will, if you go to the playlists, you'll see at the top bar with playlists, and then just cut through So I have reaction videos about various folks, and then when we go through them, we're trying to unpack like what they said, why they said it. I've reacted to Vlad in a positive way, like just trying to amplify his voice, because he sometimes takes some translation. He's a great guy, but he gets really deep, and just my job as a professor is to simplify, and so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make things clear. So yeah, again, I think Scott Ritter's a true believer. I can't tell for other people necessarily. They might be, but I think, this comment, Mearsheimer's smug smiley face is even worse as he maps out. I think you just mentioned Mearsheimer. What's his name? Seymour Hersh. I think he's a true believer. He's nuts, but he's a true believer. He's never seen a problem that he couldn't track back to the American government and see they're a bunch of whatever. And this is a really interesting thing, because conservatives that buy this Russian thing, it's mind-boggling to me, because my first question is, what would Reagan have done? I'm right there with you, Ukraine. I'm right there with you. But then there are conservatives that are like, I reject the mainstream media, so I buy RT. like how would you do that? The analogy I give, okay, so you're not going to drink from this somewhat polluted water. We recognize it's a little polluted. They have a slant, right? We get that. So you're going to drink sewage. Is that your choice? That's terrible. Like, don't do that. So
yeah, same. I mean, there are other mappers, people like History Legends does a little bit of that. DPA, Defense Politics Asia, Weeb Union, New World Economics War, and so on and so forth. So these people, as soon as they do collaborations, as he says here, with Jackson and Gonzalo, Gonzalo's been arrested. Gonzalo Lira and Jackson Hinkle. Gonzalo Lira has been arrested. I've not heard about what's happened to him, but these are all people that again, always wondering what are they gaining? Is it money? Is it like narcissistic, like sense of influence, or whatever? I don't know, but yeah, lots of names out there that you can interact with, and Professor Gerdes does that. So check out those playlists. So as we come towards the end, is there anything else you think's worthy of note that's happened over the last week, or anything that's significant? I wanted to speak to you actually. On my news piece this morning, I did, and I wonder if I'll try and find it while you speak. But I did a piece on a little bit on Zelensky and the difference between him and Putin. So this is right in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So Zelensky, and not only his speeches, I'm going to buy the book. I think a book has been released of all his speeches already. But when the Spanish PM came round to Kiev and they got together, there was a picture of them embracing, and it was such a human moment of two men just embracing, and it's in stark contrast to anything Putin's ever done. Like, who's this kind of more robotic person, autocratic person, rather than a human uniter of people. And that picture for me spoke volumes. Do you want to just talk to the difference in the two leadership styles?
Yeah. So Zelensky is generally a very different picture of like, you can almost see it if you didn't know who is the Democrat and who is and I use that as a democratic kind of leader as opposed to the authoritarian. You could see it visually in the way that Zelensky acts, and you might get thrown at first because he's still wearing his olive green kind of military looking garb. That might have tricked you, but then you see the way he interacts with people, the visuals, the speeches that he gives, the way he goes to the front to meet with his people, as opposed to calls himself at the front when he's like 100 kilometers from the front, which what Putin or his body double, if there is a body double, did. Whatever it is, they just act so differently. They think differently. They come at this very differently. And I've been so impressed with Zelensky. I wrote that book on Zelensky, as you know, within the first few weeks of the war, and then I updated it for about 5 weeks. And it's on Amazon. It's free if you have like the Amazon Prime thing, whatever that is. If you have that deal, you can get it free. But I think I overstated the case. Not that I'm wrong, but Zelensky is not it's not that Zelensky is this great leader and it's Ukraine is just following him, but he is emblematic of Ukraine. I've come to deeply respect Ukrainians over the last year and a half. And I didn't say anything that like put him on a pedestal or anything. I was just emphasizing his leadership and how he acted and whatever. But I think Ukrainians are just cut out of a different cultural cloth. Russians will deny that Ukrainians are anything different than they are, but at least culturally, they're light years away. When I was interviewing Starsky, he mentioned this about how, look, we're just self-starters. We just go and improve things and make things happen wherever. That's right. And Zelensky was doing that as their leader, and he did a masterful job. I can't take anything away from him. But he is part of what Ukrainians are, and that's part of his secret sauce. It's just these people they just operate differently. One of my viewers said it's a difference between peasants and Cossacks, and I think there's something really true to that. The Russian mentality, just waiting to be told what to do or how to think or whatever, is very different than the Cossack mentality of, no, we're going to go make this happen. And that's a real legitimate comparison between the two people.
Yeah, and I think he, as Jonathan Friedman said, he's Churchill with an iPhone. So he's this leader that knows how to manipulate in a good way, manipulate the public image, manipulate the media to the best effect. Whereas Putin is very guarded about the media, guarded about the internet. So one embraces all that stuff, and the other is very much your standoffish kind of old school dictator. And who would you want to fight for? Who really gets you going? I mean, Zelensky, okay, he's got a speechwriter, as all politicians generally do, but those speeches are brilliant, and they're written kind of poetically as well. There's really good use of rhetorical devices in his speeches when you look at them. I know that on that big, was it the annual celebration, or not celebration, the anniversary, that's the word I was looking for, of the war, and he did that speech, and
with the video.
Looked at that, I think yes, and I looked at that speech. You and I both looked at that speech in our own ways, and the transcription of it was just like, this is really, really good speech writing.
Echoing Churchill in the House of Commons, talking about what would you have done on, remember 9/11 in Congress?
Yes.
That's what's happening to our country every day. In Canada, Mr. Trudeau, what would you say to your son if the CN Tower was being hit with missiles? Like, he gets
every
it.
time.
And I gave myself goosebumps echoing that just now.
Same here, same.
Good job. Yeah.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I just think it's just he will go down in history. He, as an actor, I think an actor that's media savvy gave him that advantage. And some people take the mickey. Russian shields will take the mickey out of him for being an actor. Whereas actually, I think and he had a law degree, so he's a clever guy. He's not just a comedy actor. He's got a law. He's more qualified than the shields, given their opinions, are at being leader. Not that they are, so I suppose that's not fair. But he can use all of that to deliver the goods for Ukraine. And you look, he's the hardest working individual in politics, like bar none, I'm sure. He's met all the people you want him to meet around the world. He's even phoning up, because he recognizes that the leader of Belize has a vote in the UN, right? And so he's on the phone
reaching
to
the global south. Yeah.
I
give him huge marks for leadership all the way around. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Do any of the viewers have any other questions before we wrap this up? Please get them in pretty much, now-ish. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, that's nice,
Darren.
No, I was just reading the Potato Gunman saying, what a great infusion of sensibility today, gentlemen. I enjoy having conversations with you. Like I said, I was giving you high praise. People periodically say, hey, you really need to hear about this Jonathan Pearce guy. I mean, he does a good job. Yes, he does a good job. I tell my people that all the time. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I should do a video of all giving props to all the others like you've done before. I think that's long overdue for me because there are so many great voices out there. And I need to actually I must speak to you because as someone says here, I'm plan on getting a hold of Starsky. I presume he'd be super busy at the moment, but I'd love to interview him. And if you have, I'll see if you've got his email and we'll I'll see if I can speak to him because that would be great. But yeah, no. Thank you very much, Professor Gerdes. Really appreciate speaking to you. And let's do this again. Thanks to all the people who have supported. Thank you for all the new members who have joined. Thanks for the super chats. Really appreciate that. Thanks for all your continued support. This was a little bit off the cuff, which is why it's a much smaller audience I think today than I've had previous.
Phone was ringing. That's all.
Yeah. So previously, so sorry for the really short lead up to this video. It was literally Darren and I were talking behind the scenes. It's like, yeah, are you available now? It's like, okay, yes, I'll come out of the garden. Let's get going. So it was like 5 minutes before. But yeah, do you want to say anything? Where can people find you, or say anything about the situation in Ukraine before?
Just look my last name up on YouTube, Gerdes. You'll find me with the Ukrainian flag and American flag in there, and then you can watch all the and if you're interested, look at the reaction videos, the propaganda where I'm trying to take them apart and understand and look at them and look at it and say, oh, okay, this is why they believe what they believe. That's really useful. But that's it. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone else. You all take care of yourself. Have a good rest of the weekend, and spare a thought for the people on the front lines in Ukraine and in the cities getting bombarded endlessly. It is a very real thing for very many people. While we may talk about it and I may point things out on a map, those lines on the map refer to, lines of humans getting battered on both sides, and spare a thought even for the Russians who may be there for no fault of their own, maybe force mobilized or whatever, and they are victim of their own situations. But of course, those Ukrainians fighting for their own sort of homeland. Is there anything you would like to say to that, Darren?
No, it's just it's sad all the way around. The sooner this is over, the better.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. Okay, take care, everyone. Take care, Darren, and all the best to you all.
Thank you.